Hey guys, today we are going to talk about the Civil War. Last week we talked about the first shots of the Civil War and kind of set you up for the life of a soldier and things like that. And today we are actually going to go through the war itself. So hold on to your seats. Here we go. The first thing we're going to talk about are reasons why battles happen where they happen. There are a lot of different reasons, and many times there wasn't a plan. Sometimes the soldiers would literally, and this happened a few times, run into each other and a battle would ensue. But many times there were reasons, and so we're going to go through that. Number one are road networks. These armies were huge, and not only were there thousands of men, but there were thousands of animals. All right, either to feed or transport the men. There were wagons, there were artillery. And so having clear roads were really important to transport these men. So whichever side controlled certain road networks, okay, could have an advantage over the other side. The next is railroad networks, and same as in with the road networks. Whoever could control these railroad networks, especially junctions, and that's where different lines would meet, they are going to have the upper hand. Another reason that battles happened in certain places was the importance of the area. So, one area that was really important in this conflict was the land between Richmond, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. These two capitals were about 200 miles apart, and there are going to be many battles in that land between them. Waterways were important as well. Again, whichever side could gain the upper hand in controlling a waterway is going to definitely have some advantages. One major waterway that was important to the war for both sides was the Mississippi River. The topography or lay of the land. Battles happen in all different kinds of topography, but a flat, open area would be the best scenario for having for having a battle. There is a best scenario for having a battle. And we'll talk about that in the next slide when we go through infantry tactics. And the last set I'm going to discuss here is reliable intelligence. So these armies were huge, as I've stated before, and many times members of the cavalry would be in charge of reconnaissance. And so what they would do is they would ride around the army and they would get as far away as they could to get information for the commanders of the army. Okay, could they get any information about where the opposite army was camped? How many men were there? What was the lay of the land? Were there friendly locals? Were there supplies in certain areas? And so, depending on the intelligence and the information gathered, that could be a reason for a battle as well. Next, we're going to talk about, I've got a short video for you on infantry tactics, and that might explain a little bit why that open battlefield was the most ideal for this conflict.
Civil War soldiers sometimes fought on mountains, sometimes they fought in the woods, they fought along rivers and streams, but most often they fought in places like this, open fields. And if you've seen a Civil War movie, or you've read about the Civil War, or been to a reenactment, you know that soldiers fought in long lines of battle, shoulder to shoulder, and nothing could look stupider to us now. But these soldiers didn't have a death wish. It's not that they weren't smart, they were using the most modern military tactics they had available to them. But the problem is that there were advancements in weaponry that made some of those tactics obsolete. This is not unique. This happens again and again. After every war, you reevaluate and you change those tactics in the following war. The invention I'm talking about more than anything else is the widespread use of rifling. Before the Civil War, guns, handheld guns, fired round bullets, and they could shoot 50 to 100 yards accurately. But suddenly, they're going to have a rifled musket be more common that fires these things, mini balls. This is a Union mini ball, most commonly because it has 3 rings. This one is a Confederate mini ball. It has 2 rings. This isn't absolute, but this is typically how they went. And these things not only spin as they leave the barrel because of grooves in the gun barrel called rifling, but they are also concave inside, which allow the bullet to actually expand and take to the grooves better. And then it spirals as it leaves the gun, and like a spiral football, these bullets will fly farther and more accurately. And suddenly, You can fire these things 250, 300, 350 yards more accurately. And what that says is that your enemy is going to get off a lot more shots at you when you're crossing that field toward them. Before the Civil War, you could get up pretty close to your enemy, make a final charge, and then overrun the position after they fired a shot or maybe two. That's not the case in the Civil War. When people tell me that Civil War soldiers had a death wish or weren't that intelligent, I ask them what they would have done. And the most common answer I get is they say, well, I would send 200 guys over here, and then 50 guys over there, and then 300 guys this way, and then 40 more this way, and 100 over in that direction. That doesn't work. All your enemy would do is shoot the first 200, reload, shoot the next 50, reload, shoot the next 100, reload, shoot the next 200, and so on. In the Civil War, it's important to march up to your enemy to deliver a concentrated fire at once. If you march up with 1,000 soldiers, maybe 100 or 200 of them could be killed or wounded in that first volley, but you still have 800 or 900 left to deliver a concentrated fire against your enemy. These are also large armies, huge armies, operating without walkie-talkies or cell phones, so it's very hard to keep them together. Marching shoulder to shoulder, waving flags, blowing bugles are some of the ways where you communicated with these troops in order to keep them moving in the battle. Imagine a large-scale battle and a huge football stadium emptying and trying to control everybody in that, trying to get them to do what you want them to do to move your army around. Very, very difficult. And the frontal movements, these get there first with the most men, bring the greatest amount of firepower as you can against your enemy, was a very important part of the Civil War. So while attacking frontally was still an important part of the Civil War, you had to get at your enemy somehow. One of the ways that you could get at your enemy, which was effective then and is effective now, is of course via flanking. Instead of attacking your enemy straight on, you can get around the end of their line. When you get around the end of their line, they're in big trouble, because if they try to fire in this direction, all their friends are in the way. Whereas if I fire from over here, I can't miss. My guys, if they don't hit him, he'll hit him or him or him or him or him. That is called raking the line or enfilade. And if you are flanked, you have two choices: run away or get shot. And despite what some people think, these soldiers did not have a death wish, so they would simply fall back and try to take up a stronger position where they could actually face their enemy. Flanking is a very effective maneuver, and it's one of many used throughout the Civil War to try to get at your enemy, to try to gain an advantage over them.
All right, so the Civil War is incredibly important to the history of the United States, as we're going to learn. It's also important for warfare in general. All right, this was known as the very first technological war, and there were so many things that happened in this war that are going to influence future fighting and future wars throughout the world. And the first thing that we're going to talk about here, the first of the Civil War, is the use of the telegraph. For the very first time, a leader, okay, in our case, it's going to be Jefferson Davis and President Abraham Lincoln, are going to get information from the battlefield faster than ever before. It was still pretty slow. It still took a while, but they could get information. It said that Lincoln used to sleep in the telegraph office, waiting for news when he had known that there was a conflict. Okay. Railroads carried troops and supplies. So the first Battle of Bull Run that you saw in your History Bunch lesson is actually the very first time that a railroad carried troops from one place to another. We also see ironclad ships in the American Civil War. So if you guys look at this picture right here, you'll see these ironclad ships. So basically, the use for wooden ships are going to become obsolete. Okay, after this conflict, all fighting ships are going to be ironclad, and meaning that they're covered in metal plates. And the first battle of ironclad ships, there was no winner. They simply fired their cannons, their shot at each other, and they bounced off of those ships. All right, more first. This is fascinating to me. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, hot air balloons were used during the Civil War. So for the very first time, we see aerial reconnaissance. And what that means is information gathering from the air. Later, all right, we'll see that happen with airplanes, but we didn't have airplanes during the Civil War. So they used hot air balloons. It is fascinating to think about, and I don't know if they used for volunteers or how they picked the person that went up in the hot air balloon, because it certainly was very dangerous. Once the other side saw the balloon go up in the air, there was, quite a big amount of time where that person sitting in the balloon could get shot down, could get shot at. But basically, in this aerial reconnaissance, hey, the men could go up and they could see where the other army was. They could see the topography of the land, and they could get all kinds of information for the army on the ground. We also see men digging trenches and foxholes to protect themselves. So that's this picture right here. This is going to carry through. World War I was almost all trench warfare. And so towards the end of the Civil War, we see more and more of these trenches. The very last major battle of Petersburg, it was an elaborate system of trenches that both sides had. And so instead of engaging on the open battlefield, they would dig a system of trenches and move closer to the enemy in that way. We also see something called total war or all out war. As the war dragged on, Ulysses S. Grant gave permission for the Union Army to engage in all out war. And basically, what this says is it's going to go beyond the battlefield. So, not only are they going to fight the opposition, the soldiers, but they're also going to destroy anything that could help that army. And what that meant a lot of times was destroying civilian farms and killing livestock and things like that, with the idea of the civilians then cannot use that livestock and crops and things to feed the army. And B, if we make it so bad, then maybe the army will be forced to surrender. We get some new words from the Civil War. There are many more than these, but these are just a few that I picked out. The word skedaddle, have you ever heard that? I say it to my kids sometimes. Grapevine, like you may have heard, I've heard it through the grapevine. That meant unreliable rumors. The term AWOL, absent without leave, this was a problem, especially towards the later years of the war with men deserting or leaving. And many historians say that the word sideburns actually came from the Civil War, named after this guy, Commander General Ambrose Burnside. So I hope you guys are excited and about going through some of the battles and seeing how the war unfolds.